afternoon, everybody. I'm literally going to be roughly as brief, let's say, as I can reasonably be here. I am a Christian and I've accepted Jesus as Lord and Saviour, which goes without saying. I do have a major dilemma, and I've discussed this with a number of people and at our church, for example. And that is, I consider that parts of the Bible, and I've mentioned Genesis 1, let's be specific about that, is a parable. Now, it's not historic. In other words, it's not factually how things precisely occurred. I believe it was a parable so that the uneducated, well, it couldn't be educated, the first people in the world couldn't have been educated anyway, but the earliest people in the world could understand the story of creation, and that worked fine for a couple of thousand years or more, shall we say. Now we're in the 21st century, and I don't want to cause any problems or spanner in the works or anything, but I would say this, and I've mentioned it, as I say, to people at our church. You've got the speed of light, pretty constant, 186,000 miles a second. You've got astrophysicists around the world who somehow, for most of us, 99% of us are out there, don't know how they measure the distances out to the furthest galaxies that they can see, but the furthest they can see at the moment is galaxies that are 31.8 billion light years away. That means it took light 31.8 billion years to reach Earth, and that doesn't change in a sense. Now, for the Bible, of course, doesn't say, we 6,000 years. Well, certain scholars, of course, have said, they've concluded, if we take it completely literally, about 6,000 years ago, God created the earth, and then by the way, and here's the critical part, he created the rest of the universe. That means the earth is basically, in some people's view, the centre of the universe. God created earth and everything on it, man and all the other animals and etc. And then he created the rest of the galaxies and then by the way, he created the sun and the moon after he created Earth. It's all very interesting, let there be light and so on. But I'm not racing in to say impossible, this couldn't have happened, etc., etc. But I would caution people to think, well, hang on. There's little wonder then that many fundamentalist Christians will not believe that God filled his universe with life as I do, and I think the evidence is there and that he has. Now, you'd straight away jump on me and say, well, show us the evidence. Well, I've been through that discussion a number of times, and anyone wants to know, I could put on a link to this one of my discussion on the subject. But in more recent years, 3,000 to 4,000 exoplanets, as they call them, in other words, planets that are circling other stars in our galaxy, have been discovered. Many will be very similar to Earth, in other words, in its perfect position around the star to be ideal for life, and temperature-wise, and all the rest of it. Now, of course, evolutionists rush out and say, life could have evolved in other places all around the universe. I'd like to put that aside in the sense and say, no, I believe that God has created the life throughout his universe, and it's too long-winded a subject, but I've done a lot of research on this and read a number of books on the subjects and seen things that indicate that there are many species of what we call aliens. They're God's creation, in my opinion, but they say, there's a whole series of aliens that have been well known and well reported and encountered, shall we say. Everything from the best known, which would be the little greys, the short greys, which have for some reason been the ones been involved in capturing people and experimenting on people, abductions they call it. Then there's those that are called the tall whites, which are not to be confused with the Nordics, which look really much like, quite a lot like human beings. And then there's there are various other species described. But the point though is, I'm waiting, like many millions of other people, on what is called full disclosure, where all of the lies and the cover-ups and all the rest of it will be totally put aside and everything will be shown, and then they'll have, I believe, on display aircraft that they had crashed. And they're not just talking about Roswell in New Mexico, which was famous, 1947. There are others, and some of the bodies that were taken and put into chemical, I forget the name of the chemical, someone could rush out and tell me what it's called, but they are in canisters, in other words, call it a fish tank if you like, but they're in canisters. Now, if anyone's rolling around laughing, that's fine too. I don't mind that. It doesn't worry me. But I believe it'll happen. I can't put a time on it. I can't say whether it's the coming months or a year or two away, or when that full disclosure will occur. But that will shock the world when it does, when they prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they have been well aware of these alien races for a long time. There'd be a million questions to ask and to answer. So I would like to ask if there's any Christians, fundamentalists or whatever, out watching this. By all means, of course I'd like civil and polite comment, not abuse. But anyone who feels that I may be right, that I might be onto something here, in other words, with it being a parable. Now, as we know, Jesus taught in parables as well, so there's no reason why God couldn't create parables and hand it down to human beings. So we're talking in this case about Moses in the Genesis and so on there. So I don't want to be belittled for saying that. I want people to consider it very seriously. And is it a parable, in other words? It's not complete fantasy and nonsense and myths and rubbish like that. It's not like that. It's just handed down as a parable, in my opinion. Now, some people agree with me and some would disagree. But I'm putting it out there anyway for initial comment, and I'd be very happy to correspond with anyone via the YouTube channel that I have, or on Facebook and anywhere else where I may put this video on for that exact purpose, for people to look at it, to consider what I've had to say, comment upon it, and let's get a discussion going on the subject. So, short and sweet, shall we say, in this case, but thank you for viewing.